So if we're going to use our probes, we're going to use it very similar to how we did before. We have the T that we put on our suction side, except I'm going to use another one of these T's and also put a T on the liquid or high pressure side. Same thing as before, we're going to zero out our scale. We're going to put our tank on the scale, weigh the total tank and the contents. Use our app to make sure that we don't exceed our tank and the contents. And we know that we're overcharged because our subcooling's too high or our superheat's too low. So for this example, I'm going to use the hose with the manual low loss fitting, the ball valve style fitting. And what I'm going to do is simply connect my tank to the vapor side. And if I have refrigerant in this tank, I can open the valve here and purge the refrigerant through the hose with this ball valve on this side. I prefer to purge it the other direction, especially if I have a tank that's brand new. So what I'm going to do is take my ball valve and hook it right in the side T of my high pressure probe with a liquid line. Then I'm going to leave my hose connection loose at the tank. Tank is shut off. And then I'm going to open this fitting and it's going to be loose at this connection. So as I open this valve very slowly, the refrigerator is going to push through this hose and it's going to purge a leak at this side. So here we go. There we go. Now the refrigerant has left the system and it's gone all the way to this point, but it cannot go anywhere. So the next thing is I'll open this valve and allow the refrigerant from this hose to go into this tank. So as I'm taking refrigerant out of the system, I will simply open and close this valve and it's going to use the high pressure from the unit to force the refrigerant through this hose and right into the tank. Notice how easy and simple that is. Without having that manifold in the way, it really makes it a whole lot faster. But the same scenario is it's very easy to take too much refrigerant out. So when the scenario that I have to put refrigerant back in actually gets a little bit easier in this. We get our new tank of refrigerant and we get another hose. And we do the very same thing. I'm going to take and close my hose off, attach my hose to the suction side. I have my new tank of refrigerant. I'm going to leave the hose loose right here. I leave my hose loose at the tank, and as I open my low pressure valve, the refrigerant flows through the hose, low pressure vapor is leaking out right here at my tank. I tighten this up, now I've purged the hose. I can then open my tank up, turn the tank upside down, zero my scale, put it in the scale, and I can then add refrigerant. And then if I want to switch between the tanks, all I have to do is just switch the tanks on the scale. They're already hooked up. I can have both tanks set up and going at the same time. So it's very simple to do. When I'm done with the low pressure side, it's very easy. I simply close my tank off completely. I'll go ahead and open this hose so the last of that refrigerant goes into the system. On the high pressure side, it's going to be similar. We're going to close this connection off right here. But on this side, I'm going to leave my hose attached to my tank. And what I'm going to do is leave my hose up high. Now, if I hooked it up on the vapor side, it's going to allow that refrigerant to drip back into the tank. It's really essentially a vapor locked, so it's not going to flow in very fast. It has to have one drip of liquid go in and have to replace that with vapor. But if you leave this hose up high for a little while, eventually most of that refrigerant will drip back into the tank, especially as the temperature of this tank starts to drop. That way you don't have to worry about all this liquid refrigerant in the hose. And in some scenarios, it just doesn't go back into the tank and you're going to end up losing the refrigerant, the liquid refrigerant inside of this hose. And with that could come oil and everything else. So if you open this valve, you want to make sure that your hands are free and clear from it. You have a rag so that you're catching the oil from that refrigerant and it's not getting everywhere and making a big mess. But most of the time I found if you hang this up high, put it in your van with this hose up high, that refrigerant will drain back in. But I want to take and disconnect that hose before I start running. So when I'm done, I simply close this tank off completely. I open this valve up. If you can see all that's right there is oil. The oil is foamed out. That's what we're talking about, the mess. And this is mineral oil because it's R22. But had this been POE oil, polyester oil, I want to be careful that I don't get that oil on any kind of a roof because that oil will start eating away the roof as it turns back to an acid, and it will also start eating away on any kind of drain lines. But really, if you put it into a rag, don't get it in your hands, it's fine. Mineral oil, I've had no issues getting mineral oil in my hands. Just a little service tips, ideas on how to do it. There's multiple ways of doing it, but notice that we're able to use the compressor while the system is running, and the compressor is able to pump the refrigerant into our recovery tank. So there's multiple ways of doing that, but we just simply open the high side, connect the high side to the tank, pumps it out of the system into the tank. And that's called a passive recovery, using the system's compressor to take refrigerant out. Also, if you have a system that's running and you're going to decommission it, you can do the same thing. You can open it up and pump most of the refrigerant into the tank, liquid straight into the tank before we do the other recovery process, and it actually speeds that process up.